There are very few pieces of infrastructure that people use every day, complain about constantly, and yet quietly generate enormous amounts of money year after year. In Denmark, the most famous example isn't a company, a tax, or a natural resource. It's a bridge. The Storebælt fixed link doesn't manufacture anything. It doesn't export goods. It doesn't invent technology. And yet, it has become one of the most successful infrastructure investments in Danish history. In 2024 alone, 13,679,475 vehicles crossed it. Every single one paid to do so. And even though the bridge was paid off years ago, drivers are still paying 230 kroner per car and 635 kroner for a 10-meter truck every time they cross. So the obvious question is, if the bridge is already paid for, why does it still cost so much? And how does it keep making billions? To answer that, we need to understand why Storebælt was built and how it was financed, what it has actually earned, and why making it free would be far more expensive than people think. Before Storebælt opened, Denmark was physically split. Moving people and goods between Zealand and Funen required ferries. That meant waiting times, weather disruptions, limited capacity, higher logistics costs, and no true national transport backbone. For a country dependent on trade, manufacturing, and regional integration, this was a structural bottleneck. Denmark's economy was modernizing. Supply chains were speeding up. Labor markets were becoming more interconnected. And Denmark's role as a transit country between Scandinavia and continental Europe was growing. But geography stood in the way. The idea of a fixed link across Storebælt had existed for decades, but it was considered too expensive, too risky, and too politically controversial, until the late 1980s. Construction on the Storebælt fixed link began in 1988 and continued until 1998. The railway connection opened first in 1997, followed by the motorway in 1998. This was not just one bridge. It was an entire transport system. A rail tunnel between Zealand and Sproe, a suspension bridge between Zealand and Sproe, a low bridge between Sproe and Funen, fully integrated road and rail infrastructure. The engineering scale was enormous. The East Bridge alone stretches 6.8 kilometers, with a main suspension span of 1,624 meters. The pylons rise 254 meters, among the tallest structures in Denmark. Each foundation caisson weighs 32,000 tons. Each anchor block weighs 325,000 tons, packed with sand and iron ore to counter the massive forces from the main cables. Each main cable is 3 kilometers long, 83 centimeters thick, contains 18,648 steel wires, is protected by a dehumidification system installed in 2014 to 2015 to extend its lifespan. The rail tunnel beneath the seabed is 8,024 meters long, runs up to 75 meters below sea level, was bored using 4 custom-built tunnel machines, contains 62,500 concrete elements manufactured on-site in Halskov. This wasn't infrastructure built for a generation. It was built to last for centuries. At the time, the Storebælt project was considered extremely expensive. In original prices, the project cost 26.5 billion kroner. Adjusted to today's prices, that corresponds to roughly 38.1 billion kroner. That number alone made the project controversial, but what mattered more than the price tag was how it was financed. Instead of funding the project through taxes, Denmark chose a different model. AS Storebælt raised loans on Danish and international capital markets. The logic was straightforward. Borrow the money, build the infrastructure, let users repay the loans over time. Drivers, rail operators, and logistics companies would pay tolls and access fees. Those payments would cover construction costs, operating costs, maintenance, interest on the loans. This made Storebælt one of Europe's largest examples of user-financed infrastructure, and for many years, the majority of toll revenue didn't represent profit at all. It went straight to debt service. Here's where the story changes. Since opening, Storebælt has generated enormous revenue, over 53 billion kroner has been earned from road traffic alone. Around 13 billion kroner has come from rail traffic. Operating costs and reinvestments over the years total just under 11 billion kroner. Financial costs, mainly interest, amount to roughly 27 billion kroner. When you add it all up, something remarkable appears. The tolls have not just paid back the bridge, they have paid for it 1.5 times over. In other words, Storebælt has repaid its construction cost plus an extra 50%, and that repayment was completed years ago. So why are people still paying? At this point, many people reach the same conclusion. If it's paid off, the toll should disappear. But that assumes Storebælt is just a construction project. It isn't anymore. Once the loans were repaid, Storebælt didn't stop costing money. It still requires continuous maintenance, structural monitoring, safety systems, energy, staff, long-term reinvestments to ensure it lasts another 50 to 100 years. But here's the key shift. The tolls no longer pay for the past. They finance the future. With nearly 14 million vehicles per year, even modest tolls generate billions in predictable annual revenue. And because operating costs are relatively low compared to income, Storebælt has effectively become a state-owned infrastructure cash flow. Making Storebælt free sounds appealing until you look at the consequences. First, traffic would surge. Tolls act as a demand regulator. Remove them, and traffic increases, congestion rises, wear and tear accelerates. Maintenance costs increase. The bridge is robust, but not designed for unlimited free use without pricing signals. Second, rail transport would suffer. Storebælt isn't just a road link, it's a combined road and rail system. Road tolls help keep rail competitive. Remove them, and road transport becomes artificially cheap. That would undermine passenger rail, freight rail, climate goals, long-term transport planning. The toll isn't just a fee, it's a policy instrument. 3. The revenue is already used. The billions generated by Storebælt don't sit idle. They support ongoing upgrades, structural preservation, national transport infrastructure, and financial stability in state-owned companies. Removing tolls would create a multi-billion kroner hole that would have to be filled by higher taxes, cuts elsewhere, or new borrowing. Politically, that's far harder than keeping a toll most people grumble about but accept. People don't like tolls, but they tolerate them when the alternative is worse. The value is obvious, and the cost is predictable. Before Storebælt, ferries cost money, took longer, were unreliable. Storebælt replaced a paid convenience with a faster, more reliable paid solution. That trade-off still feels fair to most users. There's another reason the bridge keeps earning money, even beyond tolls. Storebælt increases economic productivity. It reduces travel time, integrates labor markets, strengthens logistics, improves national cohesion, and reinforces Denmark's role as a transit country. That generates higher tax revenue, more business activity, and greater regional integration. In that sense, Storebælt pays for itself twice. First, directly through tolls. Second, indirectly through economic growth. Very few infrastructure projects manage that. Storebælt succeeds because it combines geography, there's no true alternative route, engineering, built to last far longer than the debt, finance, user-paid, not tax-funded, policy, pricing controls demand, monopoly, you can't bypass it. That combination is extremely rare. It makes Storebælt not just a bridge, but a state-owned monopoly with stable, predictable demand. So how does a Danish bridge make billions? Not by being greedy, not by being inefficient, not by charging for something unnecessary. It makes billions because it solves a fundamental national problem. It was financed intelligently. It charges users instead of taxpayers. It controls demand through pricing, and it was built to outlive the debt that created it. And that's why it isn't free. Because from the state's perspective, making Storebælt free wouldn't be generosity. It would be economic self-sabotage. Most infrastructure loses money. Storebælt doesn't. It connects a country, funds itself, shapes behavior, and quietly converts daily convenience into long-term national value. And every time you cross it, you're not just paying for a bridge. You're paying for one of the most successful infrastructure investments Denmark has ever made. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for much more.